The avalanche had stopped 20 minutes ago, but the echo of crashing snow and rock still rang in her ears. Her research camp lay buried somewhere beneath tons of debris in the valley below, along with her communication equipment and any hope of rescue. She clutched her field medical kit tighter, the only thing she'd managed to grab when the mountain began its violent descent. The Carpathian wilderness stretched endlessly around her, and winter was closing in fast. As a wildlife veterinarian, she'd spent months studying the ecosystem here, but she'd never imagined being trapped in it. A low whimper echoed from deeper in the cave. Elena froze. The sound came again, weak, desperate. Against every instinct screaming it had to stay hidden, she activated her headlamp and moved toward the sound. What she found made her heart stop. 3 wolf cubs, barely old enough to open their eyes, huddled together in a makeshift den. Their mother was nowhere to be seen. One cub was clearly injured, its tiny leg bent at an unnatural angle. The others were hypothermic, their small bodies shivering violently. Elena's medical training kicked in immediately. She'd worked with injured wildlife before, but never in such desperate circumstances. She carefully examined each cub, her hands steady despite the cold. The injured one needed immediate attention. A simple splint would stabilize the fracture, but she needed to warm them all first. She pulled emergency heat packs from her kit and arranged them around the cubs, then created a windbreak using her jacket and some fallen branches. The cubs' whimpering gradually subsided as warmth returned to their small bodies. Elena worked through the night, monitoring their breathing, administering small amounts of glucose solution, and keeping them stable. As dawn broke, painting the cave walls with pale light, Elena heard something that made her blood freeze. The deep, resonant howl of an adult wolf, answered by another, then another. The pack was searching. Whether they were looking for the cubs or hunting the human scent now permeating their territory, Elena couldn't tell. She had a choice to make. She could leave the cubs and try to find her way to safety, or she could stay and face whatever was coming. Looking down at the 3 small lives she'd fought all night to save, the decision was already made. The howls grew closer. Elena positioned herself between the cave entrance and the cubs, her hands trembling not from cold but from the realization that she was about to face one of nature's most efficient predators. She thought of her research, of the intelligence she'd observed in these animals, and hoped that somehow her actions would speak louder than her species. The first massive shape appeared at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the morning light. Elena held her breath, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether she lived or died. The wolf that emerged from the shadows was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, its coat was a mixture of silver and black that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. But it was the eyes that truly captured her attention, intelligent, calculating, and filled with an ancient wisdom that made her feel as though she was being measured by something far beyond a mere predator. Behind the alpha, 2 more wolves materialized, their movements fluid and coordinated. Elena recognized pack behavior from her studies, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. She remained perfectly still, her body positioned protectively over the cubs, who had begun to whimper at the scent of their pack. The alpha wolf's nostrils flared as it took in the scene. Elena could see the exact moment when it registered the cub's condition, the makeshift splint, the warming packs, the careful arrangement of her jacket to create shelter. The massive head tilted slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. For several heartbeats, predator and human regarded each other in absolute silence. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm. She'd read about submissive postures, about avoiding direct eye contact, but every instinct told her that this moment required something different. This wasn't about dominance, it was about trust. Slowly, deliberately, Elena reached into her medical kit and withdrew a small syringe. The alpha's lips pulled back in a warning snarl, but Elena kept her movements steady and purposeful. She held up the syringe so the wolf could see it, then gestured toward the injured cub. "Antibiotics," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "To prevent infection." The alpha's ears flicked forward, and Elena realized with a shock that it was listening not just to the sound of her voice, but to the meaning behind it. She'd heard stories from other researchers about the intelligence of apex predators, but she'd never fully believed them until now. She moved slowly toward the injured cub, keeping her movements telegraphed and non-threatening. The alpha watched. Every gesture, its massive frame coiled with potential energy. When Elena gently lifted the cub to administer the injection, the alpha took a step forward, close enough that she could feel its breath on her shoulder. The cub barely flinched as the needle went in. Elena administered the medicine with practiced efficiency, then carefully set the small creature back down. The alpha sniffed the cub thoroughly, then turned its attention back to Elena. Without warning, the great wolf stepped forward and pressed its massive head against Elena's shoulder. The gesture was so unexpected, so deliberately gentle, that tears sprang to her eyes. She remained perfectly still as the alpha centered her, learning her essence, marking her as something more than prey. When the alpha finally stepped back, Elena saw something in its eyes that she'd never expected to see from a wild predator: acceptance. The other pack members seemed to sense the shift in their leader's demeanor, their tense postures relaxing slightly. As if summoned by some silent signal, more wolves began to appear at the cave entrance. Elena counted at least 8 adults, all watching her with the same intense evaluation. She realized she was witnessing something unprecedented, a wild pack making a collective decision about a human intruder. The alpha wolf moved to the cave entrance and released a single, powerful howl that echoed across the mountains. The other wolves responded in kind, their voices joining in a harmony that seemed to vibrate through Elena's very bones. She didn't understand the language, but she felt the meaning: acceptance, protection, family. 3 days had passed since the avalanche, and Elena found herself living in a reality that defied everything she thought she knew about wildlife behavior. The pack had not only accepted her presence but had actively begun including her in their daily routines. She'd been given a place in the cave hierarchy, not as a subordinate, but as something entirely new, a trusted outsider with specific responsibilities. The alpha, whom she'd begun thinking of as Magnus due to his imposing presence, had assigned her the role of primary caretaker for the cubs. It was a position of honor she was only beginning to understand. Each morning, the pack would bring her food, usually the choicest portions of their hunt, and watch as she tended to the young one's medical needs. The injured cub, whom she'd named Hope, was healing remarkably well. The simple splint had done its job, and the little one was already attempting to put weight on the leg. The other 2 cubs, Courage and Faith, had bonded with Elena in a way that amazed her. They would curl up against her for warmth, their tiny bodies trusting her completely. Elena had begun to understand the complex social dynamics of the pack through careful observation. There was Vera, the alpha female, whose silver coat marked her as Magnus's mate. She would often lie beside Elena during the cold nights, sharing her body heat. There were the younger adults, Storm, Shadow, and Frost, who served as scouts and hunters. And there was Elder, an ancient wolf whose scarred muzzle spoke of countless battles survived. What struck Elena most was how the pack had modified their behavior to accommodate her presence. They seemed to understand her limitations as a human. Her inability to hunt or navigate the treacherous mountain terrain in the dark. In response, they'd created a support system that ensured her survival while allowing her to contribute her unique skills. On the fourth morning, Elena woke to find the cave entrance blocked by a massive snowstorm. The wind howled outside with such ferocity that even Magnus seemed concerned. The pack drew closer together, forming a protective circle around Elena and the cubs. She realized that without their acceptance, she would have died of exposure days. As the storm raged, Elena found herself thinking about the research she'd been conducting before the avalanche. She'd been studying pack behavior, trying to understand how wolves made decisions about territory and resources. Now she was living the answer to those questions. The pack had made a decision about her based not on instinct or dominance, but on her actions and her value to the group's survival. The cubs were growing stronger each day, their personalities beginning to emerge. Hope was clearly the most adventurous, often trying to follow the adult wolves to the cave entrance. Courage was thoughtful and observant, watching Elena's every movement with intense curiosity. Faith was the gentle one, always the first to offer comfort to her siblings. Elena began to realize that she was witnessing something that few humans had ever experienced: true acceptance by an apex predator species. The pack had made her part of their family not through force or submission, but through mutual respect and recognition of shared values, the protection of the vulnerable. As the storm gradually subsided, Elena prepared herself for what she knew would be the ultimate test of the bond she'd formed with the pack. Soon, the cubs would be strong enough to travel, and the pack would need to move to new territory. The question that haunted her was whether she would be invited to join them, or if her role as protector would end with the cubs' recovery. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by fresh snow. Elena stood at the cave entrance, watching as the pack prepared for their first major hunt since the avalanche. The cubs were now strong enough to be left for extended periods, and the pack's food stores were running low. It was time to test the bonds that had been forged in the crucible of survival. Magnus approached Elena, his massive frame moving with the fluid grace she'd come to associate with absolute confidence. He paused beside her, his golden eyes studying the vast wilderness that stretched before them. Then, to her amazement, he pressed his shoulder against hers, not in dominance, but in invitation. Elena's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The pack was inviting her to join the hunt. In her years of studying wolf behavior, she'd never heard of such a thing. Humans were typically seen as competitors or threats, never as potential pack members. Yet here she was, being offered a place in one of nature's most exclusive societies. The hunt began before dawn, with the pack moving through the snow-covered forest like liquid shadows. Elena struggled to keep up, her human limitations becoming painfully apparent. But every time she faltered, one of the wolves would appear beside her, offering silent support. Storm, the youngest of the adults, seemed to have appointed himself as her guide, staying close and alerting her to dangerous terrain. They tracked a small herd of elk through the morning, the pack's coordination a masterpiece of natural strategy. Elena watched in fascination as each wolf took their assigned position, their movements orchestrated by signals she was only beginning to understand. When Magnus finally gave the signal to attack, Elena remained at the periphery, knowing her role was to observe and learn, not to participate directly. The hunt was successful, and Elena found herself part of the pack's feeding ritual. She was given a portion of the kill not as charity, but as her rightful share as a contributing member of the group. The significance of the gesture wasn't lost on her. She was no longer just a tolerated outsider, she was family, but the real test came that evening when the pack encountered another group of wolves. Elena recognized the signs of territorial dispute immediately: the raised hackles, the aggressive postures, the low growls that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. She prepared to retreat, to avoid causing conflict, but Magnus stepped in front of her, his massive frame blocking any approach to where she stood. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Magnus made it clear that Elena was under the pack's protection, that any threat to her would be met with the full force of their united strength. The rival wolves, recognizing the determination in Magnus's stance, withdrew without further challenge. Elena realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in the animal kingdom, a wild pack defending a human as one of their own. The implications were staggering. She'd become part of something that existed outside the normal boundaries of species interaction. As they returned to the cave, Elena found herself walking in the center of the pack formation, surrounded by the adults, protected and valued. The cubs greeted her return with excited whimpers, pressing against her legs as if to reassure themselves that she was safe. That night, as the pack settled into their sleeping arrangements, Elena found herself in the position of honor between Magnus and Vera, with the cubs curled against her side. She was no longer a human studying wolves, she was a member of a family that happened to be wolves. The transformation was complete. She had proven herself worthy of their trust, and they had proven themselves worthy of hers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the bond they'd forged, but tonight, Elena fell asleep to the sound of the pack's contented breathing, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Spring came to the mountains with a violence that matched the avalanche that had started Elena's journey. Torrential rains and melting snow turned peaceful streams into raging torrents, and the pack was forced to relocate once again. But this time, Elena wasn't struggling to survive, she was thriving. The cubs, now adolescents, had grown into their names. Hope led the way on difficult terrain, her once injured leg now stronger than ever. Courage had developed into a thoughtful strategist, often positioned as a scout during hunts. Faith had become the pack's emotional anchor, the one who sensed tension and worked to maintain harmony. Elena had evolved too. Her human limitations had been transformed into unique advantages. Her medical knowledge had saved 2 more pack members from infected wounds. Her ability to plan and strategize had helped the pack avoid dangerous encounters with human hunters. Her opposable thumbs had proven invaluable for tasks that challenged even the wolves' intelligence, but the true test of her integration came when the pack encountered a family of human hikers who had become lost in the wilderness. Elena watched from the tree line as Magnus and the other adults evaluated the situation. The humans were clearly in distress, a father, mother, and 2 young children who had been separated from their trail by the spring floods. Elena expected the pack to simply avoid the humans, to treat them as they would any other potential threat. Instead, Magnus looked directly at her, his golden eyes asking a question she understood perfectly. What should we do? The moment was profound. Magnus was not just asking for her opinion, he was acknowledging her as the pack's expert on human behavior, just as she had deferred to his expertise on wolf behavior. The circle of trust was complete. Elena emerged from the tree line, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. The human family's reaction was predictable: terror at the sight of a woman accompanied by a pack of wolves. But Elena's calm demeanor and gentle voice gradually overcame their fear. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to communicate across species lines. "These wolves aren't going to hurt you. They are here to help." Over the next hour, Elena demonstrated something that challenged every assumption about the relationship between humans and apex predators. With the pack's assistance, she guided the lost family to safety, the wolves serving as escorts and protectors. The children, with the fearless curiosity of youth, were the first to understand what they were witnessing, a bond that transcended species boundaries. When they reached the main trail, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. She could have left with the human family, returned to civilization, written papers about her unprecedented experience. Instead, she chose to stay with the pack. "This is where I belong," she told the amazed family. "They saved me, and I saved them. We are family now." As the human family departed, Elena felt a familiar pressure against her shoulder. Magnus stood beside her, his presence a comfort that no human relationship had ever provided. The pack had given her something she'd never found in the human world, unconditional acceptance based on her actions rather than her words. The cubs, now almost full-grown, pressed against her legs. Vera nuzzled her hand. Elder, the ancient wolf whose approval had been the hardest to earn, offered a rare display of affection by resting his scarred muzzle against her arm. Elena looked up at the mountains that had become her home, at the family that had chosen her as surely as she had chosen them. In a world where humans and nature often existed in conflict, she had found something rare and precious, a place where trust and loyalty transcended species, where protection was offered not because of what you were, but because of who you chose to be. The pack began to move toward their evening hunt, and Elena fell into her accustomed position in their formation. She was no longer Dr. Elena Vasquez, wildlife researcher. She was Elena of the mountain pack, protector of cubs, sister to wolves, living proof that even apex predators could recognize and honor the bonds that truly mattered. As the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elena understood that she had found her place in the world. Not as a human among wolves, but as a being who had earned her place in the circle of protection that defined true family. Asterisk.